stance that they have taken, that they are not going to negotiate with M23, is, in my view, self-defeating. You know, I understand President Ruto is the current chair of the East African Community Summit, having taken over from President Salva Mayardit Kir of South Sudan. So in that context, I understand that he is reacting properly and saying, these are member states, let's have an urgent meeting. But it beggars belief that you are calling the president of a former colonizer and a neo-colonizer to tell you how to run African affairs. But all these are out of what I call colonial hangover. African politicians still hold the view that they must be second-guessed and supported by presidents of former colonizers. We must decolonize our minds. You don't need Macron. You don't need any president to tell us in Africa how we can make our own peace. This is why they look down upon us, that even the things we can do, we still behave as if we are school boys and school girls, and they've got to tell us what to do. I hope that when the meeting of the East African Community Heads of State is convened, heads of state will say, no, we don't want France, no, we don't want all these fellows. They could be friends of goodwill, but the territory must be defined. What we are doing for Africans, let Africans do. Nyerere was so clear in these things that lasting peace can only be achieved if it is midwifed by Africans who are guarantors. And if we want any international presence in the meeting, it should be through the institution of the United Nations in which we are members, not some foreign power. And Macron has demonstrated not once, not twice, that he has great contempt for Africa, and we should shut him out. You know, there are many suspicions as to who is the guarantor and who is the person behind M23. There are suggestion and speculation that M23, of course, as we know, this is in the public domain, that the Rwanda is behind them. There are those who even argue that even France is behind them. There are those who even argue that the United States is supporting them. Those arguments are there. But even if that were true, I believe that it is African countries who should, in the first instance, examine what is on the ground. And if indeed the French are involved in some way or other, then it is our duty to ensure that those umbilical cords are cut. But ultimately, one of the things that must be done, even as we blame others, is not to deal with the symptoms, but to deal with the root cause. I know there are many individuals, one of whom has written over 20 books. And in those 20 books, what he does is to make all manner of accusations against Rwanda and against M23. And that individual has indeed been one of the fellows that is cited as the authorities in that area. But when you read some of his books, I'll not mention him, you see that the idea is to demonize Rwanda, the idea is to demonize the M23, the idea is to demonize any organization that is trying to emphasize the significance of resolving these issues as a matter that can be resolved by the Congolese. I have always held the view that if there was an administration in Kinshasa which wanted to resolve all the Congolese problems, then they would call what I call the all-Congolese meeting, at which all combatants would then be present. And in that way, you would then have the issues resolved. I believe at one time, there are people, some Catholic bishops of Congolese origin had made that suggestion. And there are important Congolese leaders who have also wanted to have these things resolved. I believe Fayulu, may have his biases. I believe Dr. Mukwege is one of the fellows who have spoken about these. They may have their own biases, but this is the time. When your house is on fire, you don't put oil, you look for water. When a rat is in your house, you don't burn the house, you remove the rat. And when your neighbor's house is on fire, you help them so that it doesn't spread to your own. And the wisdom of the occasion therefore demands that we have these meetings, and because these meetings will also help us identify who are the sponsors, who are the guarantors, and in that way will resolve the problem, hopefully once and for all. You know, President Kagame must be understood at different levels. Level number one, that he himself was a refugee after the first genocide in 1959. And his family was in Uganda for a very long time, suffering discrimination and alienation. And when he was in that space, that he himself participated jointly with President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni in liberating Uganda when he was a part of the NRA-NRM. And we also must remember that it is him and his comrades who are in the forefront to stop the genocide in 1994, when we now know anything between 800 and 1 million people were massacred in a manner that was completely unprecedented in the continent of Africa. So he must be understood in the context of the genocide, and that he is a leader who emerged from that space. And when people have called President Kagame a dictator, I've denied it. I've said Kagame is a disciplinarian. And his disciplinarian approach is informed by the realities on the ground in Rwanda. And remember that around Rwanda, there are also people who ran away, people who belong to the old regime of Habyarimana and who are in the army, and people who are civilians who are involved in the massacre of the Tutsi and moderate Hutus in Taharamwe, who are actually still in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when therefore it is said that Kagame is an expansionist, and he's been accused of being an expansionist. In fact, he, together with President Yoweri Museveni, have been accused of wanting to create what is called the Bahima Batutsi Kingdom. I don't think so. I hold the view that what they have been trying to do is to say that we have a territory whose integrity we want to protect. You are trying to impose on us people with whom we have filial ties, with whom we have same blood, our kith and kin, but who by dint of colonial boundaries are actually Congolese. And that therefore we must be on a defensive stance. To compare him therefore with Putin, who belongs to a different dispensation in a different environment, is to miss the point. And the point is that he finds himself as a leader together with his comrades in arms in a post-genocide era, and he is trying to rebuild a society. And that process of rebuilding a society requires that one is eternally vigilant, because the perpetrators of the genocide, most of them are still alive and well, and one may dare say may even have genocidal ideas, and therefore one cannot lower one's guard. Therefore, in the same manner that Putin is saying that people of Russian stock, wherever they are, we have a duty to protect them, Kagame is also saying, as according to these commentators, that anybody who is of Tutsi stock, wherever they are, we are going to protect them. And I think that that argument looks very logical. But its logic dies when you come to grip with the reality that in the case of Rwanda, the people who are of Rwandese or Tutsi stock in the Democratic Republic of Congo are actually Congolese. And in the case of Russia, we must also remember that what is today Ukraine or Russia were part of the Soviet Union. So sometimes that comparison is not without merit. Is not without merit, particularly when you look at the history and the circumstances. But I believe that the underlying philosophical reasons or practical or social reasons that informs the manner in which they conduct themselves is a little nuanced. but there is a sense in which when historians write, it will be right to say that certain boxes are ticked for both President Putin and for President Kagame in protecting their very own. You know, in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Goma is the biggest city. And remember, that is a mining area. That is a mining area, and the mines that are to be found in eastern Congo, whether it's uranium, whether it's cobalt, whether it's rare earth, whether it's gold, the biggest airfield, official airfield, is to be found in Goma. It is also the city that connects you with the rest of East Africa, whether you are talking Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and the rest of the African hinterland, if you may. So it is significant in that regard because of absence of good infrastructure in DRC.